A higher production of zines of past and present was to include silkscreen printing, a process that involves layers of ink pressed through screens that have blocked off areas. It's common in t-shirts and poster art, but because of the space and equipment needed, it's a little daunting to get into. I'll show you how I use simple self-service copy machines available to us at our local copy shop that can be managed to get a screen printed effect to our own zines and poster art. But before I go to the copy shop, I need to do a little bit of behind the scenes work. I need to do my color separations using Adobe Photoshop, and I'll show you how I add a halftone effect to those color separated layers. Earlier this year, I really got into the art of screen printing, but recent shutdowns have prevented me from having access to the facilities at the studio. So I was looking for ways to create my own kind of screen printed effects without having to get an actual kit, messing around with chemicals and screens. And the way that I've come up with involves using the color settings on the copy machine at my local FedEx. There is a function that allows you to pick either single color or a double color, which is either a red, blue, green, cyan, magenta, and yellow with a black. So you have your RGB colors, you have your CMYK colors, and then if there's any overlap between those, you can create some kind of new third color. I have a file open in Photoshop, and I'm going to do some color separations on this. First of all, I want to make sure that my file is the right size, because on the copy machines at FedEx, I print at 8.5 by 11. So I'll go ahead and check my image size. It's close to 8.5 by 11. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to reset those, make it 300 pixels per inch, and I'm going to change my width to 8.5. My height is too much right here, so I'll address that in Canvas. I'll go ahead and hit OK. Let's resize my image, and then I'll go into canvas size to cut it down to 11. And now my image is properly sized. Because I'm using single colors to represent each one of these tones, I'm going to make this a black and white image, but first I need to decide what should have its own color. I think that the yellow of this VW bug that Alina here is sitting upon should definitely get its own color of yellow. I think the model, possibly her head could be one color, and then the rest of her body could be another. And then I see the background beyond the bug, that could be its own color too. So I'm actually talking about 4 colors at the moment. That's the head, the bug, the body, and the background. The body and the background don't actually touch each other, so it might be worthwhile to leave this region, the body, and this all the same color. And the way that I'm going to separate everything out is I'm going to use selections, but instead of being tedious with it, using something like the magnetic lasso, which normally follows the lines around a person, or the quick selection tool, which essentially grabs everything in a certain region, I'm going to be a little more brutal, and I'm going to use the polygonal lasso. These are straight lines, and they kind of act like scissors. If you had scissors in real life cutting this out, it would definitely be straight lines all the way around. It's faster for me to do in this tutorial. If you wanted to be more precise, obviously go with one of those other selection tools I mentioned, the magnetic lasso and the quick selection tool. But for my purposes, this is just fine. I'm going to zoom around her head, and to add on to my selection, I just hold down Shift. Okay, so I have the bug and the young lady selected. I'm going to duplicate this layer by dragging it down, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit Delete. Now, nothing appears to be different, but my background layer which has everything, is still there. When I turn off the eyeball icon, now you see that it's just these sides here. Turn the eyeball back on. I'm going to duplicate my background layer again. This time I'm going to invert my selection. And the quick way to do that is to hold down Shift, Command on Mac, and Control on Windows, and I. But you can also find inverse in this select menu here, inverse. And now I'm going to hit delete. And if I turn off the eyeballs on everything else, you'll see that now it's just the car and the young lady. So background is one layer, young lady and car another. Now that I have that, I'll go ahead and deselect. I need to cut out the young lady. Gets a little dicey when the hair matches the background. This was originally shot on a Fuji Instax piece of film, which is a little credit card size piece of film. That's why it has this very soft look to it. Now that I have her, I'm going to do the same exact thing. Duplicate this, delete. And now I have a version without her. I'll go ahead and go to the version that has her, and then I'm going to inverse that selection. I'm almost done. If I only wanted her to be one color, the car to be its own color, and the background to be its own color, then I'm good to go. But my original idea was to have her body and this layer be the same color. So within this selection, I'll go ahead and cut around her head. And I'm okay with connecting my selection here because on the layer I'm working on, there isn't anything there. When I had this eyeball turned on, it looked like there was a background there, but there wasn't. Go ahead and duplicate this, hit delete. Now I have the headless version. Go to the layer that has the head, inverse the selection, delete, and then I can deselect. So here's the state of things. We have our original. We never get rid of our original, but we don't need to see it. We have our head layer. Go ahead and call it head. We have body layer, car layer, and floor layer. I want the floor layer and the body layer to combine, so I'm going to go ahead and drag it down here. With the floor layer above the body layer, I'm going to go to layer, merge down, and now they're one and the same. At this stage, if you were ready to print, you could simply save as. You could simply, at this stage, if you were ready to print, you could simply save each layer as its own thing. We'll call it print 1. Save it as a JPEG because that's the format that the copy machine reads. Turn on the body layer, save that one as its own layer. And when you save things as JPEGs that have this sort of invisible channel to it, this alpha, the little checkerboard pattern, when you save it as a JPEG, it just fills that in with white. Now, having done it the easy way, I want to show you guys the couple steps more that I like to go for when I do my own personal art this way. I'll create a new layer below all of these. I'm going to paint it white. And the reason for creating this white layer below is because I'm going to start converting these to halftone. And to do that, I need to convert to bitmap, and to convert to bitmap without shrinking down the image, there needs to be something in the background. I know that sounds a little complicated. When I get going, you'll see what I mean. Now, I want to convert this to a halftone, and halftones are tiny dots that made up images in newspapers in the 20th century before digital printing techniques. And to do that, I need to convert to a bitmap. The bitmap is grayed out here. The way that I get to a bitmap is to actually switch to grayscale first. As I'm converting to grayscale, if I want to use a bitmap, I need to be 8 bits channel, and that is easily accomplished there. There's no noticeable decline in quality. I'll go ahead and do image, mode grayscale. It asks me if I want to merge the layers. I can choose yes or no. And then at this point, I now have access to the bitmap. So I'll make my bitmap. I'm gonna have to flatten visible layers for this stage, but I'll back up when I do my body and the car layers. Hit OK. The output is going to be 300 pixels per inch. I'm going to use a halftone screen. The halftone is going to have my current settings, 39 lines per inch at 140 degrees. And you get this kind of thing going on. To convert it back to a JPEG, I need to go back to mode, save it as grayscale, size ratio 1. And now I have a half-toned head that I can save as my black and white JPEG halftone 1. And then these steps I'm going to repeat for my other layers. I just utilize history, which if you don't have open in Photoshop, you can access through here. And I backed up to the grayscale level. Go ahead, turn off the head, turn on the body layer, go through the same steps. Once I have my 3 layers separated, I'll go ahead and send them over to FedEx. I can email my files or I can put them on a thumb drive. Then we'll head over to the copy machine. One thing that's kind of fun for me though is each time I save the layers as a new bitmap with a halftone screen, I like to really change the screens a lot. So maybe this will have 48 lines per inch at an angle of 120 degrees. It's up to you. Ultimately, you might not notice any difference at all, or you might notice an extreme difference. I'm interested in effects involving halftones, including when the copies get misaligned when you put them back in the machine to get, say, the car layer, and when something overlaps and the dots don't match exactly. So this is just kind of like a fun way for me to enjoy those effects that probably not very many people notice. But now that we have our layers, let's head over to the copy machine. At the self-service copy machine, we can take our image files on a USB stick and print them out as individual black and white copies on regular paper. At my shop, I don't have access to the color controls unless I'm making direct copies from prints, as opposed to sending a file through a USB stick or email. So I have to do this step first. Now that I have my black and white copies, I can access the color options on the copy machine. In our case, the ability to change full color to single color or two color. Two color option means one of the red, green, blue, magenta, cyan colors with a black. The paper I'm printing on is a 100-pound Bristol paper that I got from the art store. It gives a really nice polish to my mini poster, but because of its unusual weight, I have to feed it through the specialty drawer on the side and key in its weight and size each time I place the paper there. If I try to use the regular copy drawer, the paper will get stuck and I'll be out my fancy paper. I'm doing my layers one at a time, printing my yellow car layer on 3 pieces of Bristol, taking those sheets back to the specialty feed and running the body layer color, and then doing the same for the head. So here's my preliminary example. And I also did a version of the 2-color process for the head, but because the halftone effect ended up being just a mix of magenta and black and kind of a grayish tone, it isn't really the ideal version of showcasing what 2-color can do. I'll go ahead and show you some examples of zine pages I did as a 2-color process that didn't have any halftone effects on them. We also have some other posters I did where I mixed a blue layer and a yellow layer, and where there was overlap on the images, I was able to get a green mix. The way that I was able to overlap certain areas of the image was simply in Photoshop to leave that area untouched instead of completely separated, as in my example of the young lady on top of the VW bug. It's a lot of fun to experiment with color mixes, color separations, layered effects, introducing things like lettering or physical objects in the same way that the old zine makers of the past did when they got their hands on copy machine technology. And while you can't do everything one can do with physical inks in a screen print, it's within the ballpark, and there's certainly creative methods unique to this copy machine process that'll spark within your own brain as soon as you get started making your own copy machine zines and posters.